One of the hottest days of the year, and I'm sat inside with all the studio lights on, so forgive me if I'm glowing a little bit here. A few weeks ago I did a video on this triple deck boombox. Now at the time I wanted to show it to you. I thought it was unusual having 3 cassette decks next to each other. I imported this from Japan. Unfortunately for me it didn't work. When I opened it up to see what the problem was, I saw that the clutch mechanisms had snapped apart and also the belts had turned to goo and they'd gone all on the back of the flywheels. I realised those flywheels would need to come out, but I didn't know exactly how to get them out of the machine. After all, I'm not a cassette deck repair expert, I'm just some chap who dabbles in these things. But I thought, well, I'm sure there'll be somebody out there who knows what to do. I don't know anyone personally that I can ask, but by putting a video out, there's going to be 100,000 or more people see it, and even if a tiny percentage of those know what to do and get in touch, then that will help me out. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as I put the video out, a chap called Callum Christensen on Patreon explained to me how the flywheels were held in with a split washer and how to remove that. And then another chap called Chaz Large said that when you take those washers off, often they fly across the room or snap, so he sent me across some spares. And then another chap called Kevin Woolfell, who'd been to a flea market and seen some cassette deck mechanisms for sale in a box, had got home, he watched my video and he realised those were the same mechanisms he'd seen at the show, and he got in touch and said, do I want them for spares? And I said yes, and he went and got those for me and sent them over. So now I've got the spares I need and hopefully the knowledge I need to be able to get this thing working again. So let's see how I got on. So I need to remove all 3 of these flywheels from this side. They're held in place on the other side by the split washers which are around the capstans. And in addition to that, I also need to repair the clutch mechanisms. These are the remnants of the previous clutch mechanisms that I found inside the back of the machine and in the box the machine came in. But rather than try and glue those together or something, I'm just going to take the clutches off this newer mechanism that I was sent. You might wonder why I don't swap the whole mechanism over. Well, there are subtle differences between the two, which means they aren't directly interchangeable, but I can use some of the parts off the new one on my older one. Incidentally, the one that's inside my machine seems like an earlier revision of this tenashing mechanism, which I showed in a previous video, the last mechanism being made. This is an even cheaper version of it though, because they've done away with the clutch. I think they just expect the belt to slip when it locks up, which seems a very shoddy way of doing things, but it'll have saved them a very small amount of money, which is why they've done that. So getting back to the task in hand, this is the split washer which is holding the whole capstan and flywheel assembly in place. If I put a pen next to it, you can see just how small it is, and I need to put something into that split on there just to pull it apart a little bit to fly off past the capstan, and that will enable the whole thing to come out. And it flew off, as you can see there. I did manage to find it. It didn't go very far. It's made out of plastic, which is why it bends like that. And you can see it would go around this indentation at the base of the capstan on this side. But if we flip it over onto the other side and take the belt off here, this whole assembly can now be pulled out through the hole. And if I flip this over, you can see the problem I was dealing with. These are the remnants of the belt, but they're no longer a belt. It's just a rubber gunky mess. It's very difficult to clean something like that off without removing these flywheels, but taking them off wasn't as difficult as I thought. So now it's just a matter of cleaning them. And in this video, you won't see me doing much cleaning, but that's what I was doing the most of over and over again until absolutely no black marks came onto the cloth whatsoever. I was using isopropyl alcohol. You don't want any kind of gunk left on there. So with that cleaned, I noticed I'd got this little spring on here with a piece of plastic next to it. And I thought, well, where's that come from? Oh, this is all we need. I've broken something else. But it turns out that's what it looked like when I took the wheel off. It was underneath like that, so it fell off previously. Turns out this is the pause mechanism, so it's easy just to pop that back in place, and you can see how it kind of latches onto the pause button there. So we'll move on now to repairing the clutch mechanism on this one. The cap that should be holding it all in place had split, which is why it all fell apart. So that's the part I'll be taking off one of these other clutches. And it does fit on mine. They're all the same size. One difference though is the felt washer is glued to the bottom of the clutch on this one, whereas mine it was a separate washer. So I'll just put the original washer back in its place. I'll use the new wheel off the new one though, which doesn't have any kind of belt gunk inside it. The spring goes on the top of there, and then the new cap goes on top of that. So there we go. That's a newly assembled clutch mechanism, exactly how it should be, and it will now work for a number of years, hopefully. Hopefully it won't split again like the previous one. Maybe they just used the wrong kind of plastic on it or something. But once we put this wheel back in here, the flywheel, get the belt underneath there and onto the new clutch, and you can see that's all working fine. Now this is the old drive belt on the right here. This one, you can see it's deformed, so I'll put a new belt on for that. It looked fine, but it doesn't look fine when you take it off. So that goes on the upper of two wheels on there, the one nearest to the center of the motor and over the top of the flywheel. So just spin that to make sure everything's in its place. Now don't worry about these belts being twisted. They are square belts, so they sort of automatically untwist themselves as you spin them around, so nothing to worry about there. Put a bit of tape over that so it doesn't all fall out when I turn it upside down. Put the plastic split ring on there again, slide it down the capstan until it clicks in place in that little indentation. And then I can take the tape off and just check that everything's running smoothly, and yeah, fine. So that's the first one done. Quite happy with that. So if this was a single deck, we would have been done at that point, but we're moving on to deck 2 here. I've split the washer again and it's popped off, and there it is, I've found it. So I'll put that to one side. And again, we're taking out that flywheel. And you can see how just as before, the belts turned to a tarry mess on the back of there, so that all needs cleaning off. Interesting though, how one of the belts did that, whereas the other belt seems relatively fine, but still I'll need to replace both of them. I'm going to use this belt out of the other mechanism. I notice how it's looped around a piece of plastic here. That piece of plastic forms the pause mechanism. So you need to take that out to get the belt off this one so I can put it on the other one. But this is good practice because I now know how the pause mechanism all fits together. There's a couple of components here, one goes underneath the other one. So once I've figured that out, I now know to repeat that when I put the belt on the original machine, and it just, again, you take that pause switch off, slide the belt underneath and put the pause switch back in the middle of the belt again. Now I'll hook that under the motor to the outer of the two wheels, and I'll just bend it over the top of the motor to hold it in place while I work on the rest of it. Now this is the belt that replaces the one that turned to tar. That goes underneath the flywheel. It would be quite difficult to get that on, I think, without taking the flywheel off. It would be quite hard to see, but with the flywheel removed, it's quite simple. Just push it underneath there and then loop the other end around the clutch wheel. So now I can bring the belt in from the motor that I'd hooked over the top, put it on the flywheel, make sure that's in position, and then put the clutch back together again, which involves putting the spring on there and the new cap on top. Spin it around a bit, check everything's working as it should do, and then spin it over and put the split washer back on the capstan, pushing it down until it clicks into position. And then we're moving on to deck number 1. This one's a little bit different. It needed a circuit board removing out of the way. The original clutch wasn't broken, but I did replace it because if 2 of them have snapped, it's only a matter of time, I'd imagine, before the first one does the same thing. Also with this one, it's difficult to remove that flywheel. Once I'd taken the clip off, I thought it would have just slid out like the other ones did, but no, the bracket that's holding the motor in place for this one is fouling the wheel, so I can't get that out until I've loosened it a little bit, and then I can pull the flywheel out. And you can see on here, there's not too much on the back of there, and that means that some of that belt is elsewhere inside the machine. So I just had a bit of a look around, and there's a little bit down in here as well, so that needed to be removed. So a bit of cleaning of the rest of the machine was needed on this part. Now the belt, just like the other ones, goes underneath the flywheel and across to the clutch, and the belt on this one is a little bit shorter than on the other 2 decks because it's got its own dedicated motor, so it doesn't need to reach quite as far. So it's just a matter of putting the new belt on, putting the circuit board back in position, putting the bracket back where it should be, taping down the flywheel, putting the clip on there again, and that's it. I think I've got it all back together now, so I'm really quite happy with that. Just a matter of putting it all back inside the case again. If we just put to one side for a moment the fact it needed repairing, overall it does have that 1980s Japanese build quality to it that you don't find in similar devices from the 90s. For a start, it's clearly designed to come apart. The wires are socketed rather than soldered. 4 screws hold all the 3 cassette decks in place. The plastic is of a good thickness. It doesn't creak, it doesn't flex, it's got a nice finish on it. Everything fits back together neatly. The parts that failed were really just unfortunate. A dodgy batch of melting rubber belts and plastic clutch caps that split somewhere over the course of 34 years. But it turns out that provided you've got the correct spares, both of these problems are surprisingly easy to rectify. This has been the most satisfying repair job I've done so far. Just a few weeks ago, getting this back together was beyond my capabilities, but now, thanks to the generosity of others, it's up and running again. I've got to say, beyond the novelty though of the triple decks, this is a very bare bones device. There's no noise reduction, it doesn't have auto reverse, it's not got a digital tuner, doesn't have soft touch controls. It really is quite a simple machine. But even though it's using a very basic mechanical mechanism, they have managed to give it a few little neat features. So let's see it in operation. Let me talk about the switches on the top of the machine, starting from the left. That is the tape type. In the right hand position, it's for metal or chrome tape. That's just for playback though. If you want to record, you record onto type 1 tape, and that's in the left hand position. The next switch along is the source. So in the far right position, that's for the line inputs on the right hand side of the machine, the stereo RCA line ins. Next position, radio. Next one along, record from the built-in microphone onto tape 3, and then far left position is just the cassettes. It's also kind of off unless you've got one of the cassettes moving. Now, tape 3 is your main cassette deck for recording onto. If you record off the radio, it can only go onto tape 3. If you record from the microphone, it's onto tape 3 as well. However, tape 2 can record, but it's really just a dubbing deck. That is if you're recording tape 1 onto tapes 2 and 3. You can do 2 copies at the same time. So tape 2 is for dubbing, tape 3 is for the main recording. If you want to do high-speed dubbing, you move that switch to the right-hand side there. So let's have a look at the dubbing in action. So I'm going to put 2 blank tapes in, one in tape 2, one in tape 3. I'm going to put Retro Grooves Volume 3 in deck number 1. And I'm going to use this dual synchro record function. To get this to activate, you have to put decks 2 and 3 into record pause. Once you've got deck 2 pause, that also holds deck 3, so you can then take the pause off that one, and then when you press play on deck 1, both of those will immediately start recording. So now I've got 2 copies of tape 1, well, one side of it at least. If I wanted to record the other side, of course I'd have to take all 3 tapes out, flip them over and do the whole thing again. All these functions work, although it is over-egging some of them a little bit. For example, it says one touch record. What does that mean? Well, if you press down the record button, the play button goes down at the same time. And relay play works exactly how you'd expect. You put decks 2 and 3 on pause, and then when deck 1 reaches the end, it activates deck 2, and then when that one reaches the end of the tape, deck 3 starts. Of course, with this not being an auto-reverse machine, you're listening to one side of 3 tapes. The TPS or tape program sensor is a way for you to find the next track on a tape, provided that there's a gap of silence between the tracks. So once you've got the tape in the play mode, press either rewind or fast forward, the tape will move along until it finds that silence and then hold it in that position. To get it to play, you have to press stop, which sounds a bit back to front, but this is the only way they could implement it on a mechanism like this with no servo activation. I never knew. Oh, and there's one thing I definitely should clarify, otherwise people will write in. You can see all 3 tapes working at the same time here, and yet earlier on I said you can't play all 3 at the same time. So which is it? Well, this is just a weird quirk. If you put the switch into the microphone mode, which is really designed for you to record onto tape 3, you can get the other 2 tapes to spin at the same time. There's absolutely no point behind it other than it looks cool, but it doesn't really do anything other than that. I wonder how much power I'm getting through when I'm rewinding all 3 of these at the same time, though. Does this thing eat batteries? I haven't managed to use it enough to burn through any yet. It's probably not that bad because I'm just using 2 motors, but I did test the batteries out just to check they were good before moving on to the next test. let's do some speed and wow and flutter measurements on this. This isn't going to be great. Remember, this is a budget machine, but looking at deck 1, first of all, that was 2.5% fast, which is quite fast. 0.3% wow and flutter, which is kind of expected for this machine. Now, people always say, well, you can change the speed by adjusting this little screw on the back of the motor. And yes, you can. That's what that's there for. Although, good luck trying to do that while the motors are inside this machine, facing away from you and buried in the back there. Yeah, I suppose it's possible if you were to do something weird, but yeah, most people wouldn't be adjusting that. So let's move on and have a look at deck 2. Well, this is a bit better on the speed, 1% fast here, but a little worse on the wow and flutter, 0.6%. A bit blurry there as well, so sorry about that. Deck 3, 1.2% fast, 0.15% wow and flutter. So the best wow and flutter on deck 3, but deck 2 had the best speed. It's all a bit variable really, but one thing I wanted to test was how would these results be affected by dubbing my test tape across to a blank tape. So we've got a 3000 Hertz signal on tape 1. We've got a blank tape in deck 3. I'm going to record that across at single speed on one side and then flip it over and do high-speed dubbing on the other side, and then we'll compare the results between those two recordings. Now, this is real edge-of-your-seat stuff, the kind of thing that YouTube was designed for, but I better come up with the results before anyone has a heart attack. So first off, surprisingly good. Normal speed, 2% fast, 0.3% wow and flutter on the copy. So that's better than deck 1 on its own, which was 2.5% fast originally. You'd imagine you'd combine that with deck 3 and get a worse result, but no. And then high-speed dubbing, better still, 0.6% fast, the best result so far, and 0.2% wow and flutter. And I think what's happened here is by having it going fast and having two decks going at the same time, we've actually put quite a bit of drain on that battery, which has slowed everything down comparatively speaking. And we're getting better results with two decks going at the same time than just one deck on its own. So a bit of a surprising result that. Turns out that high-speed dubbing provides a better quality of speed and wow and flutter than it would just playing one tape on its own. But then again, this is a bit of an odd machine all round, and that's what I love about it. So this offers a very typical performance for a mid-1980s portable stereo, but I can't dislike that. It's a very honest device. If you saw a bright red plastic triple deck stereo system on a shelf in a shop in 1985, you wouldn't think that thing was going to outperform a Nakamichi. And all the features it says it has, and they all work, which is something I can't say for this Boombox that I bought a couple of weeks ago, which doesn't even have stereo on it, and it says it's got an automatic program search system, but it turns out they just put a sticker on there because they didn't really know what APSS stood for. This is stereo, and it's surprisingly good stereo. Great separation for obvious reasons, but the quality of it is fine. I mean, it's quite a nice well-rounded sound to it. I've enjoyed listening to tapes on this while I've been putting this video together. The radio's got great reception as well, so really I can't fault it. It is exactly what it looks like it is, and it works exactly how you'd expect. And that is all now thanks to the people who've helped me out putting this video together, because I didn't know how to repair this a couple of weeks ago, and now it's back working again. So I've got to thank everyone that's helped me with this one. It's great when something turns out as good as this has. But that is it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.